I was 7 years old when I first understood that my father would never love me the way he loved Blake. It wasn't something he said outright, at least not then. It was in the way his eyes lit up when Blake walked into the room, the way his voice softened when he spoke to him, the way he ruffled Blake's hair while mine remained untouched. Blake was my cousin, 2 years older than me, and the son my father never had, or rather, the son he wished he'd had instead of me. My mother died giving birth to me. Complications during delivery, they said. A tragedy that couldn't have been prevented. But my father saw it differently. To him, I was the reason she was gone. I was the trade-off he never agreed to make. Every time he looked at me, he saw her absence. And every time he looked at Blake, he saw the life he could have had if things had been different. Blake's parents, my Aunt Sarah and Uncle Tom, lived just 3 houses down from us. After Mom died, they practically raised me alongside Blake while Dad buried himself in work. Sarah would pick me up from school, make me snacks, help with homework. She treated me like her own son, and for a while, I thought maybe that was enough. Maybe I didn't need my father's love if I had theirs. But children notice things. They notice when their father shows up to every single one of their cousins' soccer games but can't make it to their science fair. They notice when Christmas presents are wildly unequal, Blake getting the latest gaming console while I got clothes from the clearance rack. They notice when report cards come home and straight A's get a distracted good job while Blake's B+ average gets a celebratory dinner at his favorite restaurant. By the time I hit middle school, the comparisons had become constant. "Why can't you be more outgoing like Blake?" my father would ask when I preferred reading to parties. "Blake knows how to have fun. Blake knows how to make friends. Blake this, Blake that." It didn't matter that I was at the top of my class, that teachers praised my work, that I won academic competitions. None of it measured up to Blake's easy charm and athletic prowess. Blake, to his credit, never rubbed it in my face. He was genuinely a good kid, friendly, inclusive, always trying to pull me into his friend group, but even his kindness felt like salt in the wound. I didn't want his pity. I didn't want to be the tag-along cousin who needed his protection. I wanted to be seen, to be valued, to be enough on my own merit. High school was when things really started to crack. I threw myself into my studies with a desperate intensity, thinking that maybe if I achieved something truly spectacular, my father would finally notice me. I joined every academic club, took every AP class, studied until my eyes burned. My GPA was perfect. My SAT scores were in the 99th percentile. Teachers wrote glowing recommendation letters calling me one of the most gifted students they'd ever taught. Meanwhile, Blake coasted through with average grades, more interested in parties in his car, a brand new BMW my father had bought him for his 16th birthday. When my 16th came around, I got a card with $50 and a reminder not to waste it on those books you're always buying. The college application season was when I finally allowed myself to hope. I'd gotten into several top universities, places that would open doors, change my life, give me the future I'd worked so hard for. I carefully prepared my pitch to my father, spreadsheets showing costs, potential financial aid, return on investment. I practiced what I would say, how I would present it as not just good for me, but good for the family's reputation. The night I showed my father my acceptance letters remains burned into my memory like a brand. I'd waited until after dinner, when he was relaxed in his study with his evening whiskey. I knocked softly, entered when he grunted permission, and laid out everything on his desk: acceptance letters from MIT, Stanford, and Northwestern, along with my carefully prepared financial documents. He glanced at them for maybe 30 seconds. 30 seconds to evaluate 4 years of blood, sweat, and tears. Then he leaned back in his leather chair and said words that shattered something inside me. "College isn't for everyone, son. Maybe you should consider trade school. Plumbing pays well." I stood there, speechless, as he continued. "Besides, I've already committed to funding Blake's education. Arizona State isn't cheap, and he needs the support more than you do. You're book smart, you'll figure something out." Blake was going to Arizona State with a 2.8 GPA, and my father was paying every cent tuition, room and board, spending money, spring break trips. The same father who couldn't spare anything for my education at schools that people would kill to attend. When I tried to argue, to point out the scholarships I'd earned that would cover part of the cost, he cut me off. "The decision is made. Blake is family." "I'm your son," I said, my voice breaking despite my best efforts to stay composed. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a moment I saw something flicker in his eyes. Regret? Guilt? But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "You're the reason I don't have a wife," he said quietly. "Blake's mother has been more of a parent to you than I ever wanted to be. Maybe you should ask her for the money." I left his study that night knowing our relationship, whatever remained of it, was over. I enrolled in community college, paying my own way with a part-time job at a warehouse, loading trucks from midnight to 8 a.m., then attending classes until the afternoon. My days blurred together in an exhausted haze. While Blake posted Instagram photos from fraternity parties and spring break in Cabo, all funded by my father, I was surviving on ramen and Red Bull, falling asleep over textbooks, my hands raw from handling packages. Sarah and Tom tried to help when they found out, offering to loan me money, but my pride wouldn't let me accept. This was my father's responsibility, and if he wouldn't step up, I'd do it myself. I'd prove that I didn't need him, didn't need anyone. 2 years of community college. Then I transferred to a state school with whatever credits would carry over. It took me 6 years total to get my bachelor's degree, working full-time while studying. 6 years of watching from the sidelines as Blake graduated in 4, my father throwing him a massive party, buying him a new car as a graduation gift, setting him up with a job at one of his business connections. The unfairness of it ate at me like acid. but I channeled that anger into determination. I graduated with a degree in computer science, debt-free because I'd paid as I went, even if it meant taking fewer classes each semester. No one came to my graduation. I didn't even tell them about it. What was the point? I got an entry-level job at a tech company. Nothing glamorous, but it was mine. I'd earned it myself. I moved to a different city, changed my phone number, and essentially disappeared from my family's life. The only person I stayed in contact with was Sarah, through email, and only because she'd been the closest thing to a mother I'd ever had. Years passed. I climbed the corporate ladder slowly but steadily. I wasn't making six figures or driving luxury cars, but I had my own apartment, could pay my bills, could even save a little. I dated occasionally, had a small circle of friends, built a life that was modest but mine. Through Sarah's carefully neutral emails, I learned about Blake's trajectory. After the cushy job my father had arranged fell through, Blake had convinced my father to invest in his surefire business idea, a chain of upscale gyms. My father had remortgaged his house, liquidated his retirement savings, taken out business loans. He gave Blake everything, believing that his golden boy couldn't fail. But Blake could fail. And he did. Spectacularly. The gyms were poorly managed, overpriced for their markets, opened right before an economic downturn. Within 18 months, they were hemorrhaging money. Blake's solution was always the same: more investment, more loans, just a little more time. And my father, unable to admit he'd backed the wrong horse, kept throwing good money after bad. By the time Blake admitted defeat and declared bankruptcy, my father had lost everything. His house was in foreclosure. His retirement was gone. He was 70 years old, in debt up to his eyeballs, with nothing to show for it but IOUs from Blake that would never be repaid. It was a Tuesday evening when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. The voice on the other end was older, raspier, but unmistakably his. "Son?" my father said, and the word sounded foreign in his mouth. I stayed silent for a long moment, processing the surreal experience of hearing my father's voice after 8 years of no contact. He'd gotten my number from Sarah, he explained, his voice shaking slightly. He needed to talk to me. It was important. "I'm listening," I said, keeping my voice neutral despite the way my heart was racing. What followed was not the apology I'd sometimes imagined in my weaker moments. It wasn't a recognition of his failures or an acknowledgement of the pain he'd caused. Instead, it was a business proposition, delivered with the same tone he might have used with a potential investor. He was in trouble, he explained. The house was gone. The business loans were coming due. Blake had disappeared to find himself in Thailand, leaving my father to deal with the wreckage. He needed a place to stay, just temporarily. He needed a loan, just to get back on his feet. He needed his son to step up and help family. "Family," I repeated, tasting the bitterness of the word. "Like when I needed help with college?" "That was different," he said quickly. "You were young. You didn't understand how the world works. Blake had potential." "Blake had your love," I interrupted. "That's all he had. And you gave him everything else on top of it while I worked myself to the bone for scraps." "Don't be dramatic," he snapped, and for a moment, the old dynamic reasserted itself. The dismissive father, the disappointing son. But I wasn't that desperate kid anymore. "I'm not being dramatic. I'm being factual. You chose Blake over me every single time. You paid for his college while telling me to consider trade school. You bought him cars while I took the bus. You invested your entire retirement in his business while telling me I needed to be more realistic about my dreams." The silence on the other end stretched out so long I thought he might have hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was smaller, more fragile than I'd ever heard it. "I know I wasn't the best father to you." The admission seemed to physically pain him. "But your mother's death, it broke something in me. Every time I looked at you, I saw her. I saw what I'd lost. So you punished me for it," I said, my voice steady despite the tears I could feel building. "You punished a child for being born. Blake was easier," he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "He didn't remind me of anything painful. He was just light, fun, everything you weren't. Everything I wasn't allowed to be," I corrected. "How could I be light when you made it clear from day one that my existence was a burden? How could I be fun when nothing I did was ever good enough?" He tried a different tactic then, shifting from confession to manipulation. "You've done well for yourself. Sarah tells me you have a good job, your own place. You could help me, and it wouldn't even impact your lifestyle. I'm not asking for much. Just enough to get by until I can figure things out." I almost laughed at the audacity. "How much did you give Blake over the years? Between college, cars, the business investment?" "That's not relevant." "How much?" I insisted. Another long pause. "Around $400,000, all told." $400,000. The number sat between us like an unexploded bomb. $400,000 that could have changed my life, that he'd handed over without hesitation to someone else's child while his own son worked graveyard shifts to afford community college. "I have a proposal for you," I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "I'll give you exactly what you gave me when I needed help with college." I believe the exact amount was $0 and a suggestion to consider plumbing. "The trade pays well, I hear. Maybe you should look into it." "You can't be serious," he said, his voice rising. "I'm your father." "No," I said firmly. "You're Blake's uncle who happened to have a son he never wanted. You made that crystal clear every day of my childhood. You don't get to play the father card now that your real choice has left you high and dry." He tried everything, then guilt, anger, appeals to family loyalty, even bringing up my mother and how disappointed she would be. That last one almost broke my resolve, but then I remembered all the nights I'd cried myself to sleep wishing she was alive, Not just because I missed having a mother, but because maybe then I'd have had someone who loved me. Mom's dead, I said flatly. She's been dead for 28 years, and you've been dead to me for the last 8. This conversation doesn't change that. You're really going to leave me with nothing? He asked, desperation creeping into his voice. I could end up on the streets. You left me with nothing when I was 18 years old with acceptance letters to top universities. You'll figure it out. You're family-oriented, right? Maybe Blake will send you some money from Thailand. Or maybe Sarah and Tom will help. They're good people. Better than either of us deserved. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end, could picture his face red with frustration and disbelief that I wasn't falling in line like I always had as a child. You're just like your mother, he said finally, and for the first time in my life, those words didn't sound like an insult. Stubborn, unforgiving. I'll take that as a compliment, I replied. She must have been quite a woman to put up with you for as long as she did. This is your last chance, he warned. If you hang up now, don't expect— What? Don't expect what, Dad? Your love, your support, your presence in my life? I haven't had any of those things since I was born. I'm not losing anything by saying no to you. I already lost it all 28 years ago when Mom died and you decided to blame a baby for it. The truth of it hung between us, undeniable and final. There was no relationship to salvage because there had never been one to begin with. I was mourning something that had never existed, and he was demanding help from a son he'd never claimed. I hope Blake was worth it, I said quietly. I hope all those years of pouring love and money into him while ignoring me felt good in the moment, because this is where it led. You bet everything on the wrong horse, and now you're facing the consequences. And the son you threw away? He's doing just fine without you. Better, even. You'll regret this, he said. But even his threats sounded hollow now. No, I said with absolute certainty. The only thing I regret is spending so many years trying to earn love from someone incapable of giving it. Goodbye, Dad. Don't contact me again. I hung up before he could respond, then immediately blocked the number. My hands were shaking, but it wasn't from anger or sadness. It was from relief. 28 years of carrying the weight of his rejection, and I'd finally set it down. That was 2 years ago. I heard through Sarah that my father eventually moved in with his sister in another state, taking whatever work he could find to pay off his debts. Blake apparently found himself in Thailand, found himself a wealthy older woman to support him, more accurately. He sends his mother postcards, but no money, and my father nothing at all. As for me, my life didn't dramatically change after that phone call. I didn't suddenly become wealthy or successful beyond measure. I didn't have a movie moment where everything fell into place. But something inside me shifted. The constant weight I'd carried, the voice in my head that sounded like my father telling me I wasn't enough, it finally went quiet. I started therapy. Something I should have done years earlier. I began to understand that his inability to love me had nothing to do with my worth and everything to do with his own brokenness. I learned to stop seeing myself through his eyes and start seeing myself through my own. I got promoted at work not to some executive position, but to senior developer. It came with a nice raise and more interesting projects. I started dating someone, a teacher named Marcus who makes me laugh and has never once compared me to anyone else. We're taking things slow, but it feels right. Feels healthy. Last month, Sarah sent me an email with a photo attached. It was from Blake's Instagram, him on a yacht with his sugar mama, champagne in hand, captain's hat at a jaunty angle. The caption read, "Living my best life." Sarah's message was brief. "Your father saw this," he cried. I stared at that photo for a long time, waiting to feel something vindication, perhaps, or satisfaction at the cosmic justice of it all. But all I felt was peace. Blake was living his life, such as it was. My father was living with his choices, and I was living free from both of them. I wrote Sarah back. I hope he finds peace someday, but it won't come from me, and it won't come from Blake. It has to come from within. She responded almost immediately. You've become quite wise, haven't you? No, I typed back. Just free. And that's the truth of it. I'm not remarkable. I'm not wildly successful. I'm not living a life of luxury or revenge-fueled triumph. I'm just a man who learned that sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is to stop trying to earn love from people who don't have it to give. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in what you achieve, but in what you finally let go. My father chose Blake, and Blake chose himself, and I chose to stop letting their choices define my worth. That's not a Hollywood ending, but it's mine, and for the first time in my life, that's enough. Because I am enough. I always was.